If anything, it's right now that the authenticity is accentuated, and we're just showing up for that.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be pretty, and it doesn't need to feel comfortable, and it doesn't need to be packaged in this great little bow. We don't even need words for it,
right.
But we're showing up for it. So it wasn't just like no, Evan, I wanted you to shoot my music video. Get over your mental breakdown so we can do it. It's like, we don't have to press record on anything, but I'm coming up there.
Caterpillars fully dissolve in the cocoon before they become butterflies. And it was like, I think I'm dissolving. And I think this is just what I have to do right now. There's something inside of me that's just you're going to be okay, but we're just going to you got to burn off a lot of stuff right now to go to where you're going. I'm
curious, if you feel like you're going to die and you feel like somebody's in your house to kill you, is going out on the back deck the best decision?
I don't really believe in sunk costs, because every time you do something like that, it's even if you do mess it up and burn it, you learn something for the next one, and you learn something for 5 years down the road when you're doing acoustic videos. That process of discovery and seeing you be excited about it and me being excited about it, where I was like, oh, I miss feeling this way about my work even. I feel like I've become kind of so jaded and on autopilot, and that feeling where you're able to reconnect to your own emotional connection to the work is actually such a special thing.
I don't know what accumulation of things have to go right for that to be the case, but man, whatever it is, it worked, and I'm grateful for it, and I'm not going to waste it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Second Order Change. I'm your host, Evan Borsier, and today is part 2 of our conversation with Mitchel Dae. Part 1 came out last week, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I would highly recommend it because it's got a lot of great backstory on Mitchel's journey from thinking he was going to be a lawyer to becoming a musician, and that journey of just bootlegging yourself through starting to learn how to write songs, starting to record music, working with producers. And that story carries through part 2 today, which starts about 3 years ago when Mitchel got his first million stream song on Spotify. And in the last 3 years, he went from that number to now doing about 25 million streams in the last year, I think. And he has songs with 10 million streams and all sorts of crazy things going on. So it's a really fun window into the journey of riding the wave of a powerful inflection point in your life, making the most of opportunity, continuing to be resourceful and efficient and creative, and really holding to the integrity and creative intent of what it is that you're making. So I'm really excited for you to hear part 2 of this conversation with Mitchel. Before I get into that, I wanted to just quickly update you. A few people have messaged me again about the creative community, and we're going to have more information on that very soon. If you have messaged me, I have seen it. The best way to make sure you're on that list is to shoot me an email. So if you haven't done that yet, you can email me at evan@challengermediahouse.com, and we're going to have more information. Related to that, part of the reason that information has been a little bit delayed was announced this last week publicly on Instagram, which is that myself and my wife are separating after 10 years of being married together. So there's a lot of things that go into that, and a lot of logistics, and a lot of riding the emotional waves and taking care of each other. And a big part of our intent is to take care of each other and honor and respect each other through this transition in our lives. And so that's been a very large priority, and I am still very committed to this community and excited to get it out into the world. But first things have to come first. So thank you to everyone who has sent any sort of support and kindness. It really has meant the world, and I am so grateful for everyone who has done that. And if you're not interested in any of that and just want to get to the podcast, that is totally fine as well. But if you're interested in the creative community, shoot me an email and we'll get you on the list, because we're going to have more information on that very, very soon. On that note, we're kicking off the new year. We're excited to get back into new projects. So if you are someone who is either a creative professional looking for help growing your business, refining your creative vision, having actionable strategic items on gear, on pricing, on positioning, I am very open to taking on coaching containers with that right now. Or if you are someone on the client side running a business or a brand and you feel like you need clarity on your story, on your message, you need updated photography, you need a strategy for social media, you need to produce a commercial, you need to do messaging, the team at Challenger Media House would love to help you with that. And the team at Challenger is the team behind this podcast. And it is me and some of my best friends in the world who are all incredibly talented artists. And we are incredibly passionate about doing impactful work that connects people to themselves, that connects people with the resources to continue down their journey through life. And we're looking to partner with clients who are looking to do the same thing. So if you need media help and you don't need a big agency, you're like, I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to blow on having 7 people sit on a Zoom call, but you're also like, I can't really just like hire a photographer, a videographer, because I need help clarifying my vision. I need help defining priorities. I need help figuring out how to do multiple things because we need social content and website content. And like we have a newsletter. We slot into that middle slot perfectly, where we're able to provide a lot of creative and strategic support. We're able to execute at a high level, but really efficiently, effectively, and leanly. So we're able to do high-end production without the costs of traditional high-end production. And we care a lot about understanding you, your customers, your business, your vision, and how to best communicate that thing in an honest and earnest way, an emotionally intelligent way that respects the audience, respects their time, builds deep connections, and just creates more opportunity and flow in the world. So we would love to work with you. That's it. I'm done with my spiel. We're going to get right into part 2 of this conversation with Mitchel Dae. One of my favorite things is the intersection of something that is like undeniably real, but also has all of the like movie magic around it. And I feel like sometimes you can lose that, especially nowadays where it feels so just sort of like plasticky and forced. And so it was like, oh, this is an opportunity for us to do that. And so let's go in and do that. Let's like bring in some lights and a steady cam and like do this well. But then also from a implicit depth perspective, and this is one of those things that I don't know that anyone would ever pick up on, but it was like, let's make this meaningful. And so we filmed it in Mark's shop, which is like a place that you had been working before. And we were just talking about like, instead of just finding a cool location, let's find a location that feeds into the story of your journey from working at a wood shop to now having your first million hit song. And let's think about what you're wearing that sort of reflects that journey. And we're just putting these little layers into all of the art and like doing the little things of color coordination and cohesion and making it beautiful. But it also has this depth that is not explicit. It's not calling attention to itself, but it's still there. And I feel like that's been a big part of the last 3 years. It's got to be almost exactly 3 years now that we've been doing this, is like adding those layers that people may never pick up on, but if nothing else, they make it fun for us. And that was such a fun experience. It was also a funny experience, because that was the first time that you ever broke something. Which I don't think we've ever talked about, but where you decided to track the audio, and you tracked it all you tracked all the audio at 44.1, and then it wouldn't sync with any of the video.
That was, I remember feeling so out of my weight class in so many different ways with that, where it's like, okay, so you show up, like we decide we're going to do this. Evan Borsier, film a DP extraordinaire, decides to get behind this thing. And not only does he decide to, but he decides to put together an A team of some of his best, best film buddies. So we got Quentin on lighting and Mike on Steadicam. Dennis is producing it. And it's like, this is like a bigger production than I could ever afford. And you're just like, yeah, let's just do it. And so it's like, all my job is to just make sure that I'm properly miking and properly recording, like that the bit rate is correct. And I'm like, I don't know what a bit rate is, so I'm just gonna plug in the Scarlett interface and press record. You're like, dude, the audio's not working. And so that was a
funny thing, because I feel like something that I remember about that I'd just be curious your experience was that like we were just excited to do it, and I was like, this really, like, we have all these tools, we're all just chilling around Christmas, like, let's go make something fun. But the two things that I remember were you being like, what do I owe you and how do we do this? And I was like, don't worry about it. Like, this is one of the things that when you know people who can do cool stuff, you just do cool stuff. But I feel like there was this almost thing that it felt like you were like, well, I have to do something other than be me. So I'll be the audio guy. And I had been like, we can do that. And you're like, no, I got it. And then I was like, okay, fine, Mitchel's got it. And we didn't realize this until we went into editing it and you send the files over and we're like, oh, none of this stuff syncs. And like, it might all be nothing at this point. And thankfully my buddy Glenn was able to go through and like fix that and make it all work. But yeah, I guess I'm just curious, like, what was that experience like of stepping to that new level? And I don't know whether it's like feeling like you have to pull weight or feeling guilty about it. Like, was that a part of it for you?
100%. 100%. And the irony of it is like, you know, you end up breaking it where it's like, it would have been figured out. It's like your pride in some ways is the very thing that gets in the way. I think I really didn't have a reference for somebody's generosity extended to that level where you're just like, all you have to do is accept it. And so I don't know if it was because we were still like, in some ways I wanted to like not come across as ungrateful, which is funny because it's like you had already decided to do it. Or I didn't want to come across as, in some ways I had this like narrative of all of these things that, you know, artists are narcissistic and they just expect people to do things for them. And it's like, I don't want to be that guy. And so in some ways it's like, you're right. I just wanted to pull my own weight. And in hindsight, you know, it was the very thing that just it didn't need to be done and would have been better if, you know, I didn't do it. But it's those little lessons where you're just like learning how to graciously accept a gift and saying like, thank you, and letting that be the thing. But yeah, it's funny looking at that in hindsight.
Well, and it's just part of the growth process too. And that's where like, I didn't have a whole lot of heartburn over it. Because if I'm totally honest, I was like, if this doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't go anywhere at the end of the day, you know, like it hurts Mitchel more if this burns down than it hurts us. So like, I would like to make it work, but like, if we don't make it work, you learned a lesson. And that happens. I mean, I've had hard drives fail. I've had, you know, things go wrong, and that's just like a part of the process too. And you learn and you adapt and you learn how to show up differently in those situations in the future and be more prepared. But I feel like one of the things that was really cool about that was just getting to see you perform and like have this new voice and begin to step more fully into that like artist position. And like seeing the growing pains of tracking the audio. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that like, just as you were, you know, walking through writing it, it's funny to hear how your voice has even evolved since we recorded that to like where your voice is now, where like I feel like you were still finding it in some ways. But like there was still the seed of the thing there. And I like, that's the thing that I was like, this is cool. I like working with Mitchel. I like the direction this is going. And like, I would like to continue to expand upon that. And so it was a really fun sort of initiation into us collaborating. And just really fun to put it out there, and didn't go viral, didn't change the world, but was like, I think the seed of just a relationship of building these things together and going like, okay, how do we keep doing that? And so that brings us into like this last 3 years. So you have the first 6 years that's like you, and then you pull in Melvin, and then you pull in Dan, and there's like a few other random opportunities that came up in there, right? Like the indie label, there's you did that other video, was it for Lampposts with Mike's son? I feel like that was the other like kind of team thing that I had seen you do before that.
Airwaves.
Oh, Airwaves.
That was cool. That was my first like, you know, movie magic moment where you're like, oh, this is like they're shooting it on a red camera, and I'm like, didn't they shoot Game of Thrones on a red camera or something? And you're like, dude, this is another level that I had not been exposed to. And so that was super, super cool. And again, that was a free thing. Like I think Dennis had set that up. and Mike had graciously, agreed to do it for free, and all I had to do was show up. And it's like, okay, the graciousness of really talented people choosing to pour their time and talents into this for whatever reason, is just another like example of how this thing has been able to progress to where it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think that like back to the values thing and the exposure thing, it's like there is just a lot of power, and it can get a bad rap, and there are times that it can be dysfunctional. But like when you have people who are, they're aiming to put something out into the world, they're aiming to step something up, it's like investing in each other and having it be a mutually beneficial thing. I think that's, to me, the important thing is just like being clear on what you need out of it and what you're willing to bring into it, and like putting yourself in a situation where like when I was doing previous one takes, it's like I would love for this to get bigger, but I also love it for what it is. And there's a lot of power in going out and doing photos and just like building your portfolio or putting a song out with someone. And so like for those people who are in that sort of establishing stage, I think those can be some of the most valuable things. And like, yeah, there are opportunities downstream, but even that process of experimenting in those relationships, you learn how to handle those relationships, how to handle expectations, how to provide clear responsibilities, which ends up making a more sustainable relationship in the long run. And that's one of the big things that's like, for me, one of my big like life philosophies is that I don't really believe in sunk costs, because every time you do something like that, it's like, even if you do mess it up and burn it, you learn something for the next one, and you learn something for 5 years down the road when you're doing acoustic videos. You learn something that then you get to apply. There's lessons that I learned in Lens Pro stuff that I'm using now with Challenger stuff. And like, you don't lose any of that experience. And those experiences have funny ways of having opportunities to come out to play in future situations. And so just like showing up and doing the thing at the level you can, because at the end of the day, the biggest asset snowball you can roll is like relationships, awareness, and skills. And like resources follow relationships, awareness, and skills. But that's another exponential snowball that as you continue to build those things, you're able to consistently execute on a higher level. You're able to consistently make impact. And then that's where like money and other things can come down the road. But for me, it's like that whole first 10 years of anything is pretty much just like, let's build awareness, relationships, and skills. And I think that project and those projects for you were such a big step in that have really facilitated the exponential growth of the last 3 years. And I honestly don't take very much credit for that. Like, I think that you and Dan and the music have clearly carried so much farther than anything else we've done. And like, that's the foundation that's growing everything. But it's also the foundation that now, as we step into more media stuff and branding and merch and shows, like that's what it's all building out of too still. So you're building this foundation that you then can leverage into other things, because the music has to be good for anyone to want to watch a music video. Like, people have to listen to the music to want to come to a live show. And so you're just sort of adding layers to this whole puzzle that you're building. And that step of like, okay, we're going to start doing more original content, felt like a big step, even though it wasn't a big splash at the time.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's cool to watch, watch the things start to slowly round off and form into a complete picture. Even if it's not the picture that you thought it would be forming into, it's just like something that feels authentic. And then to have a team kind of assembling of people that are so like-minded and so just want to do a justice to the authenticity of whatever that means is just, I think what it does is it creates bandwidth within the branding mission to grow it into something substantive. So rather than saying like, how do we go viral? It's just constantly going back to the drawing board of how do we reiterate authenticity and how do we reinforce the integrity of this and communicate that in substantive ways. So I know I keep using a lot of these same words, but it's just because it's so ingrained in my mind of like substance, authenticity, integrity, all of these things need to be like communicated in a very both subliminally and blatantly, and they need to be things that are understood on every angle. Like at every angle that you interact with this, it needs to be reinforced by all of those things. So I think I'm just so grateful for you and Dan, who not only understand that, but are just so dead set on never compromising on those things. It's really like the heartbeat of this, and it's the thing that allows this to progress in a way that I'm proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm grateful to you for the courage and commitment to repeatedly recentering against that. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what brand really is. There's this incredible book called Brand is a Four-Letter Word that I read a few years ago. And, you know, to try to boil it down, it's like people think about branding as just like a logo and colors or whatever, but like a brand is it's what you're representing in the world. It's the promise that you're making to your consumer, your customer, whoever it is. And like that goes across, you know, you look at something like the North Face or Patagonia, it's like, it's not just a logo, it's a way of being, it's a culture, it's something that has to have fundamental integrity. And in a world now where like there is a lot of just jimmying things together quickly to create some sort of a facade, my personal belief is that the things that have a real sense of integrity and grounding are the things that are going to win out in the long run. And there is like short-term leverage in just making something look a certain way. But, you know, the artists that I look at, the businesses and companies, and even the people that I look at as most inspiring are the people who have had that sense of like centering against something. And I feel like that has been such a big part of this. So going like, what is the core of this? How do we build integrity? How do we make explicit and implicit promises with what we're doing and just hold ourselves accountable to that and never lose that? Because as long as we keep that, we can keep going. And it's like, you know, I think it's a Bible thing, but it's like the house built on sand versus the house built on a rock, right? Where it's like you can build something that's like, okay, I made a balloon animal that sort of looks like something, and I had my 5 seconds of fame on TikTok, as opposed to going like, no, this thing has a sense of what it is and where it's going, and like that snowball just keeps rolling because you don't have to start from zero every time. You don't have to catch a new wave. You're just building your own wave and riding it around. So like something that I want to talk about, like what all has gone on in the last 3 years. But before we get into that, I think the one thing that I would just be curious to dip back into that we didn't talk about was like in that first 6 years, what were the dark moments? You know, we've talked about all the highlights, but what's the struggle? What's the despair? And what's the like, I don't know if this is going to work actually that goes on in that process for you?
Yeah. It's funny because it's like the dark moments in some ways, and maybe this is, again, reinforcing my own naivety. But the dark moments have almost in them, I'm like, it's almost like you're going through boot camp and you're just not surprised when, you know, you got to walk into the tear gas chamber and you're like, all right, this is just going to suck. Like, and we just got to get through this. It's like, I think I had watched enough like interviews of people who were, you know, musicians, or they're like, you know, when I was homeless and I was doing this, and I was like, well, I'm not homeless. So I guess maybe in some ways, like we're ahead of the game.
Right.
And so, but one of the moments that really comes to mind is like, you know, just being so broke, and wanting to provide, and being married and wanting to provide, you know, a certain, provide a good life for my wife, and just not financially being able to do that. And in reality, she's never wanted that, and never had that be a prerequisite. But I think just like part of, in my mind, like wanting to be a good husband was like, I can give you the things that you want. but just not being financially able to do that. And so there was one winter of 2018, we were living in Three Rivers, Massachusetts, and we couldn't afford heat, and so we had electric heat, but it was like the apartment we were living in was split into two parts, where one part was electric heat and then the other part was oil, or heated by an oil tank. And so we never turned on our bedroom was electric heat, and we never turned it on because it was like way more expensive than the oil. And so I remember waking up and checking the thermometer, and it said like 35 degrees in the room, and you could see your breath. And I was like, oh gosh, this is crazy. And so I was like, this is ridiculous. Okay, I got to do something about it. And so I like sold something on Marketplace, like sold like a piece of music equipment or something, and got like $20 to go and fill up part of our oil tank. So, but the oil truck wouldn't come out for less than $200, which we didn't have $200. And so what I did was just like found every container in my house, like protein shake, like those big protein container things, and like Tupperware and different things, and went to the gas station and just filled up every container I could with diesel fuel. And I'm just sitting out in the dead of winter, like at the fuel entrance point outside of the apartment, just like with a little funnel and the protein powder container, and just like dumping diesel fuel into the oil tank. And it got us like, I think it was like for $20, it got us like 2 days of heat. And I remember that feeling both like such a low and such a high at the same time, where you're like, we did it. Like, this is so bad that this is like such an accomplishment, but it's like, we did it. It's almost like being in the wilderness and being able to make fire out of rubbing two sticks together, where you're like, okay, like this is getting stored away in the bank of, do I want my whole life to look like this? No. But now we know that like we can be resourceful and we can figure things out when it needs to be there. And I think what that did was just reinforce the sense of like, I have a choice. I can go stop being foolish and stop pursuing this music thing because it's not going anywhere. Or I can double down on this and really have to like make this work. And for whatever reason, I chose the double down one, and and here we are. So, but I just remember that being like it's hard to say like one singular moment of this is the low, but it's like each of these lows is immediately contrasted with this like puzzle that you got to figure out. And when you figure out the puzzle, it's also a big high. And then it's also like, okay, now I got that in my tool belt, and now we gotta like take what we learned here and apply it to making this thing work somehow. And luckily enough, like I give my wife so much credit, because she does not understand any of this, and she in a million years would never choose this option, but she's never jumped ship at all. Even in her lack of understanding of it, or lack of like getting, what drives this, she's never not supported it. And that'll never be lost on me either. It's like just the faith that it takes in a lot of ways in somebody who doesn't deserve trust. Like, I don't think I would trust myself if I were her. And yet she's like, you're my husband and I married you, and I'm going to trust that you better figure this out, and I'm going to let you figure it out. And it's like, oh, okay, you better figure it out, dude. Like, you better get going and figure it out. Because this beautiful, wonderful lady is like, she's put all her chips on you. So what are you going to do? You going to fold? Right. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's such a big piece. Like, It reminds me of back when I was living on the Cape. I think I was like 19 at the time, and I had met this band called Westland through Warp Tour. Our friend Dave Place, who I had like played in a church youth group camp band with, their band Phone Calls from Home was playing Warp Tour, and I'd gone out and like taken some photos and made this little video. This other band reached out and they're like, hey, we want to do a video for this song. And it was another one of those like, this is my big break kind of moments. They're like, okay, we've got $400 or $500 or whatever, and we're trying to like pull together a concept for the first time and like find locations and don't have any resources. And we ended up filming like 80% of it in my apartment in like the porter's basement. And I just remember like I was trying to pull together extras for this party scene and it wasn't happening. And I just remember the night before that shoot, I was like in a parking lot. I called Mandy and I just broke down. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if this is going to make any sense. I'm like, these people are giving me a lot of money, quote unquote, and I might just be wasting all of it. But there's no backing out now. You know, it's like, I guess we're just going to do it.
Right.
And it ended up being fine. It ended up doing pretty well overall, I think, you know, just like view wise. And for what it was, it ended up being fine and they were happy with it and we did more stuff together. But that experience of like, that's also the game, right? It's like whether it's figuring out how to get the heat turned on or someone going like, hey, here's $100,000 for a video campaign, or hey, here's a tour, put together a show and like make a show that people are actually going to want to see. It's like at some point we're all just making deals that's like, hey, we're going to bet on you.
Right.
And we're going to do this as a team, but like, I'm trusting you to figure this out, you know, and like, you're just going to have to figure it out. And those little experiences are part of where you find what you're made of and you find your ingenuity and your intuition. And then you're able to carry that because you need the weight of that. Like, I don't know. I feel like you have to bomb in front of 50 people to be okay bombing in front of 100,000 people. And like, that's always an option on the table, right? Like, I think that's one of the most underrated things, even when people will talk about like, oh, what they do isn't that hard. And it's like, dude, I don't know. Say whatever you want about mumble rappers or whatever. It's like, you go get up on front of everyone at Coachella with a microphone and try not to shit your pants. Like, no matter what you're doing. And if it's quote unquote goofy, that's even harder sometimes. Cause like, you just got to own it. And like, those people have found the inner integrity to own that in that position. And that is part of the personal development is like, hey, we're going to put you on stage. Hey, we're going to give you this audience. Hey, we're going to do whatever it is. You know, back when Lens Pro was like, hey, you get to represent our brand and put stuff on our YouTube channel. It's like, okay, there's a responsibility here that I get to engage with and that it is challenging, but it is part of where you find out what you're made of and you find your ability to grow. And so like those things, I think those things are like the hardest things are often the most beautiful things in the long run, not to like needlessly like be a masochist about pursuing suffering necessarily, but finding that like I find that more of the suffering comes from resisting those things than it does from just being like, this is where we're at and this is what we got to do, you know. And whether that's like I got to find a way to turn the heat on, or I got to find a way to save this audio that's not synced up, or I got to still make a music video when the weather sucks. It's like you learn how to adapt and you learn how to be with what is rather than what you thought was going to happen. And that those little skills are the skills that when you come in and you're in a songwriting camp or you're in a big project, like those experiences feed your ability to actually stay present and not crumble there because you have some sense of like inner strength. So that totally makes sense to me.
It's a funny thing when you're just like, you watch your attitude shift from constantly being conflict avoidant to just like embracing whatever the thing is as part of the story. When like you're watching a movie, you're not surprised when the conflict happens, like because that's what creates the arc. And so I don't know, I'm grateful for in some ways the ability to kind of zoom outside of myself in those moments and be like, oh, this is just part of it. And it's like, of course, no, I don't love, you know, having to spend $20, my last $20 on diesel fuel, but to, you know, to heat my apartment. But it's like, in other ways, when you zoom out at the ridiculousness of that, it's like, oh, that's the ingenuity that 4 years later is going to allow me to write a song like Innocent, that will go and like touch parts of the world that I never would have dreamed of. Or that's the, same thing that when the tour van breaks down, or the AC breaks in the middle of Texas in 104-degree weather, that is just like, all right, we're just doing it. Like, do you just fold, or do you just do it? Because if you just do it, it suddenly becomes less of a factor than it needs to be, and it frees you up to actually be engaged with the holistic story, which in a lot of times ends up inspiring some of the coolest things. And showing up for whatever the experience is going to entail is the magic. It's like when I get to the end of this life, I don't want to be like, how many conflicts did I avoid, or how many things, how many problems did I not have to embrace? But it's like, how awesome was the story at the end of all of this? And how many times did like we watch just magic unfold? Right. And how cool was it to get to figure that thing out and watch, what it started as to what it ended up being. And it's like, I don't know. It's like the whole framing just shifts when you start adapting.
Right.
Or adopting that.
And that's, I feel like that's something that I've found is like the people who I most enjoy at this point. Like one of the things that I find really beautiful about this like team that has been built is that that's a value and a thing that like everyone just has, right? That it's like we're all able to play big boy ball, and we're all able to like sit in a sweaty van for 4 days and make a music video. Like it is what it is. And Dan's down to, this was supposed to be 1 day and now it's 5 days, and like it's got to be what it's got to be. And that ability to like continually be in touch, to have these conversations again about like boundaries and bandwidth, and even that, like where it's like, hey, we're going to talk about like goals and things that we want to get done, and then sometimes life comes up and we have to be able to stick with that too, and like not have a meltdown. So okay, so that brings me to, let's zoom forward a little bit, because I believe it's a year after that, Down to the River comes out, and we were like, we should make something for Down to the River. And that was sort of the next thing that we were going to do. You were coming up, we were going to shoot some stuff in Connecticut, and I was going through it at that point. Like I was going through my internal, like I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was going crazy. I remember like it was the night or 2 nights before you came up. I was just like, felt like I had lost it. Like I remember I went out and got Greek food delivered, and I like put on Crazy Rich Asians, and like I was just there, and I was like, I don't know anything about anything anymore. I don't feel connected to anything. I feel like I'm just like literally dissolving inside of myself. There's all this like pain and discomfort and emotion going on inside of me. And I remember I woke up at that night at like 3 a.m. with just like pure terror in my body in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. And I remember like, I thought that someone was there to murder me. And I like went downstairs, and I remember I walked out onto the back deck and like just had this real feeling of like, I'm going to die right now, and that's okay. And just totally kind of surrendering to whatever that experience was. And I called you, and I was like, hey man, I don't know if you should come up here and we should make a music video, because I'm kind of like not in a great place. And you were like, been there, we'll be okay. Which I think was honestly exactly what I needed at that point. But like you came up, and we didn't have a plan really. We had like some rough ideas, and we went out to like get breakfast that morning and just like chatted and caught up. And I was like, here's what I'm going through. And then, it was sort of like, okay, if something comes out of this, great. If nothing comes out of this, great. But like, we're in this together at this point. And I remember just like so appreciating that. And we're like driving around and end up finding that like abandoned school, and just going and playing around. And like, I think we did an acoustic video of Psychosis that was like okay, but didn't feel really great. And then we're like, let's just like play with doing some like regular performance stuff. We have like a little Bluetooth speaker, and it was like, okay, let's lean into what's going on here. Like, can you be a little more psychotic in this? And I think what my experience of that was you being like, I don't know, this feels silly, whatever else, me being like, just go with it. Like, just trust yourself. and we play around for a few hours and run back to my house and throw some stuff into Premiere real quick. And it's like, oh, this is something. And hitting that new level of like expansion and a new seed. And I think both of us even being in that place of like total detachment and going through it emotionally and just being able to play that out in that moment, that it's like my guard is gone. My sense of like what this should be is gone. And we're just going to let it be what it is. And we're going to do this dance together. Yeah. And then getting to see that come into something. And then waking up the next morning and like we go out to the park and we're like, we're just going to shoot something for Down to the River. Like at this point, we're not making a music video. And literally what is like 2.5, 3 hours in the rain, we end up making this music video in the freezing cold. And that was like the first quote unquote real music video we did. But that whole experience was another, for me, just place of like, we're just riding what this is. And like, we're accepting what's going on here and we're playing in the woods and we're jumping in the mud and I, am about to have a mental breakdown, but like we're just channeling all that energy into making something. And I think for me, that was one of the first times, honestly, that I had really gotten to be on that side of that experience of being like the one who's going through it and still getting to channel that. And that was such a powerful thing and such a bonding thing too. It's like you really get to go together through something with someone and see that you're okay and see that you're not going to bail and be like, okay, no one's abandoning me, no one's judging me, like this is what it is and we're going to take it for what it is. And I feel like that experience was the thing that more than anything, I think everything that's come after that was like the fruit of you on that phone call being like, we're just going to show up, and if we don't make anything, fine. But like, I want to be here for you because I've been through that too. And I just want to say, one, I really appreciate that. But I'm also curious how that experience was for you.
It was crazy. Yeah. So it's easy for a couple things. First of all, I'm curious if you feel like you're going to die and you feel like somebody's in your house to kill you, is going out on the back deck the best decision? unless you want them to get you.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those, like, it honestly felt like a dream, though, where, like, I woke up and it was just, like, I just have to walk downstairs. Like, because, it's like I thought there's someone in the house. Like, I'm not just going to sit here. I guess I'm just going to go and, like, I remember...
I'm not just going to take this.
Right. Hello? Is anyone there? And there was no one there. And I really still don't know what that is, like, that experience. I remember I was talking to a few people, and I was like, dude, I think I'm going through, like, some dark night of the soul. Like, I just feel like for the last month, I feel like I'm dying. Like, I feel like I'm just watching my own life. And, like, I've heard about this in stories, and, like, I started researching the dark night of the soul because I'm like, what is going on? But for me, the thing that I was also holding on to in that experience was, like, one, there's a lot of this that is entirely outside of my control. And I am here and I am in this, and this is a thing that I've heard about in stories, and all I can do is walk through it. And if this is how it ends, this is how it ends. And if this isn't how it ends, like, maybe this is just an evolution, and maybe this is like that Phoenix moment, or, I remember the thing I kept coming back to was like butterflies, caterpillars fully dissolve in the cocoon before they become butterflies. And it was like, I think I'm dissolving, and I think this is just like what I have to do right now. Like, there's something inside of me that's just like, you're going to be okay, but we're just going to, like, you got to burn off a lot of stuff right now to go to where you're going. Yeah. And, like, okay, I'm riding it right now,
Dang. Yeah. And, if I am going out, gosh darn it, I'm going out on my brand new Ethan Allen wicker set on the back porch in style.
Exactly.
No, that's so funny. So I think when you called me with that initially, it was like it was very clear. It was very uncomfortable for me, and not in the sense of like the fact that you were going through it, but what I knew in some ways was the right move, and then following through with that. And so it wasn't just like no, Evan, I wanted you to shoot my music video. Get over your mental like breakdown so we can do it. It's like, oh, like we don't have to press record on anything, but like I'm coming up there.
Yeah.
And so it was really uncomfortable for me to not give you space in that moment. Especially where it's like, I don't think I had seen that side of you. And so it's like, you know, you want to be sensitive to people's, to what people are going through, or I did. And I wanted to, you know, obviously wanted you to be okay. But I think based on what I was hearing in the tone of your voice, and then just kind of like that, it's like, okay, like, even if this is just sitting in silence all weekend while Evan processes or sobs or whatever, it's like, that's what we're going to do. And I'm somebody who doesn't like to push too much in terms of, like, you know, people's boundaries and whatnot. But it was also kind of this moment of like, all right, screw that. Like, we're just going to go sit in whatever this is with zero expectations of what needs to play out here. Mm-hmm. And when I proposed that, it was with this, you know, option. Like, I don't mean to push. I don't mean to overstep. I would still love to come up if you'll have me. And if you're just like, you need your space, I totally respect that. But you said yeah, and so it's like, all right, well then we're just jumping on the plane and we're doing it. And that was like, that kind of out of character for me as somebody who doesn't want to overstep, or, you know, doesn't want, even in some ways, like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I'm not a therapist. I don't think I'm particularly great with words, but in some ways it's like, I learned from you, you know, 2 years later, it's like, when someone's in that space, you don't need to assign a narrative to it. I think just being there is sometimes the best thing. And so, yeah. And the irony of all of that is that something really, really special was both made and then formed in terms of the trust that I think we developed for each other, in that of saying, like, we don't need to be 100% okay to say yes to the journey of this. And not just the journey of, you know, making content, but engaging authentically. It's like, this is like, if anything, it's right now that the authenticity is accentuated, and we're just showing up for that.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be pretty, and it doesn't need to feel comfortable, and it doesn't need to be packaged in this great little bow. We don't even need words for it,
right,
but we're showing up for it. And I think that was the first moment where it was like, okay, this is how we're moving.
Right. And inside of that, I think for me too, it's like, it really reiterated something that I have felt in the past. And like, you know, I don't remember if at that point, I don't think I had done like on choosing violence or anything, but the value of sometimes going into something with like, this may be nothing, and almost back to what we were saying about like allowing yourself to create, and if you kill it, you kill it. But it's like, if we all hate this, we don't have to put it out, but like, we still might as well show up for it. And like the most distinct memory I have was like that night that we got back from just like running around and shooting stuff, and like quickly dumping some footage and just starting to rough cut stuff together with like you and Kevin, and how it was the first time in a long time that I felt excitement and like pride I don't know if pride's the word, but like excitement and connection to the work again. Like, as much as it was just like a little silly thing of like us dancing around, there was something about like that process of discovery and seeing you be excited about it and me being excited about it, where I was like, oh, I miss feeling this way about my work even. Like, I feel like I've become kind of so like jaded and on autopilot, and that feeling where you're able to like reconnect to your own emotional connection to the work is actually such a special thing. And I feel like that was one of the biggest gifts, was being like, oh, I have all these narratives that like it has to be some big fancy thing. You know, I have these titles, I've worked on these big projects, and like in some ways I feel like I was burning off my attachment to that and being able to come back to just like loving things for what they were, and loving them for what made them special to me, which was like so many of the projects that had been my favorites over the last 10 years were things like that. That was like me and two people running around, and we made something that felt really honest. And that opportunity to get to like reconnect with that was really powerful. And I think something that also just like reframed my own perspective on what was going to happen for the next few years. Was like, oh, I've been kind of still in this like big production mode and all these other things, and like, oh, we can't do stuff with Mitchel because we don't have resources. And it's like, we don't need any of that. I don't know why I think we need any of that, but we just don't. Like, we can just go do the dance together, and it's going to be magic. And like, I love that experience. And if no one watches it and no one ever pays us, like, I still love that experience.
Yeah. I mean, I do too. And I'm grateful for you to facilitate that, and in a lot of ways open my eyes up to that possibility, because it was through your generosity that I think any of this is possible. And gosh, man, I'd still be on iPhone footage and just like fumbling through a bunch of things that, you know, in some ways would probably create its own. There's nothing wrong with iPhone footage. I don't say that in a derogatory way, but just like, I think fumbling through no man's land trying to figure out visually how this all comes together. And I think you've in your generosity and you know, extending of talents have just brought such structure and cohesion to this.
I appreciate that, man.
Well, I appreciate that.
It brings up, so something that comes up for me inside of that experience, like specifically we're at the school and I remember doing psychosis, and something that I've had a few people who are like mutual friends ask me about in the last few years, which is, you know, it's part of your evolution, my evolution, and in our dynamic together, is people kind of going like, is this an Evan thing? Like, is Evan pushing Mitchel to be crazy almost, is I feel like kind of the vibe that I get sometimes from people. And I don't know if that's just because like people are like, I've been more public with that side of myself in the past. But like, I personally, I mean, there's definitely an element of facilitation and just going like, I want to create space for what's going to come out authentically from you. And going like, hey, no, like this isn't silly. I'm not judging it. Like, let's lean into this and push it. But I felt like that first just sort of like psychosis performance thing was the first time I saw you get to lean into that. And so I'm curious, one, what that experience was like for you, both like stepping into that and then seeing that. And then also just like our dynamic with that. Because I think that's another thing that sometimes is like mysterious to people, is like, is Mitchel coming with these ideas, or is Evan telling Mitchel what to do? And my experience is that it's very much like a free-flowing collaborative thing. But we've not talked a ton about what that experience is like for you.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a like extension of songwriting, which is funny because it's like you listen to the songs, which historically, like, you've had nothing to do with in the like the songwriting process of that, and the songs are super angsty, and so and have like a very you know, have this very clear tension to them, and so when we visually think about how this comes to pass, it's like just another extension of the songwriting. And I think while I found my voice, I haven't found my. I think for a long time I struggled to define what my, you know, outfit is, if you will. Like, how does this visually present?
And how do you, I mean, I would say, how do you embody this, right? Like, how do you take it from like a musical verbal exercise into like a physical reality?
I think it's still really defining itself, but I think the thing that does start to feel authentic is there's this switch that happens where, much like songwriting, I'm not thinking, like, when I'm sitting down to write a song, I'm not thinking so much anymore about like, what does that person think, or what does that person think? It's just like, what needs to come out? And I think it's one thing to sing that, it's another thing to perform that, like with your body. And I'm learning how to flip that switch to saying, this doesn't have to be every angle of me all the time. This is a character that is an avenue for performing this work. And when you flip into that mode, fully flip and fully commit to it, because there's no sense, and it does no one a justice to, you know, hold back with it. And so I'm still learning how to like fully lean into it and press into it, but it definitely is me. I mean, I think you've been a good mirror in some ways of in some ways just even questioning like, hey, are you fully in this? Or I'm sensing like some reservation there. Like, is there? And it's like, oh yeah, there is. Like, let's address that. And then let's shoot it again or give it another take. Until suddenly it's just like, you're just flipping it and not caring.
Right.
And then it turns out like no one else cares.
Right.
So,
and that degree
Jax.
of like the emotional authenticity of it is what ends up resonating with people. And I think to your analogy back to songwriting, it is like, to me in those moments as like a director, it's like, okay, what feels like the emotional core of this song? What are we exploring? And then how do I just make space for that thing to come out? And how do I make a playground for Mitchel to explore that? And then as we're in it, like, yes, there are conversations that are going on, but it really is like, hey, how can we sort of lean into how this feels? How can we pull out that thing? And it is sort of that paradoxical, like, it is you and it isn't you. Like, it's a part of you.
Right.
I don't personally think of it as like a character, but I think it's just like an aspect that doesn't tend to get room in like normal day-to-day social existence, but it's like a real thing. And so let's just pull it out and give it a playground and give it this room to express itself in a certain way. And that I can't, my opinion is that like, there's no way for me to make anything that resonant without it being resonant in you first. And so like, that's sort of where I start from, is like, what is he touching into on the music, and how can we pull that part of him forward more? Because that's the thing that's also going to resonate in the audience. And so all we're doing is facilitating identifying what that core thing is and then giving it space to play out.
Yeah, it's so true. And in a lot of ways too, it's like detaching from reality as you often interact with it. And so it's like, in my everyday reality, I don't want to come across as a crazy person, and I want to come across as competent and sane and, reasonable and logical and all of these things. And this character calls all of those things into question and puts them all on the chopping block.
Which is in the music, again, to your point. Like, that's what you're talking about. And it's like, well, if that's what we're talking about, let's go for it,
Right. But it's always been tough for me to occupy both of those spaces. So, from 9 to 5, where I'm customer service Mitchel, or 9 to 5, where I'm, corporate radio Mitchel, and those are my boundaries. And here's the, appropriate behaviors that you can, engage within. It's a weird thing to say, like, all right, now screw that. Like, we're just going to put on a dress and, and be a totally different, out of character, out of pocket, like, it almost feels schizophrenic. And, that in and of itself is insanity. And so if one of my fears is insanity, it's like you're having to stare your fear in the face every single time the red record button is pressed. And so it's just a decision of saying, okay, the fear is normal, and in some ways it's an avenue for the authenticity to be accentuated. Am I willing to go there? And if yes, then go there. And if not, and get the heck out of there, because you have no business being there, and this isn't going to benefit anybody. And so it's just that over and over and over and over and over. And then suddenly, one day you wake up and people are resonating with it, or it resonates with people. And it's like, oh, if you only knew the inner tension of how unqualified or not confident I felt doing this. I'm glad it translated, or I hope it translated, because I did not feel, like this was something worth moving forward with until hindsight.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's his name? I think it's Todd Herman wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect, and he's like a psychologist that's worked with a lot of really high performing athletes and stuff, and musicians, and he talks about Beyonce and all these people, and basically he talks about this idea that like we want to think of ourselves as singular functions, but like we are like just naturally, I don't want to say duplicitous, but like we are legion. You know, it's like the you that shows up in your, and the metaphor he uses is like fields of play, like business you versus with friends you versus in the bedroom you versus music you. Like these are all different things that call different aspects of you forward. Right. And so like we can look at those things and go, what are the characteristics that I would like for Performance Mitchell to have? What are the characteristics that I would like for, you know, teaching Evan to have? And that those things can be different, and actually having a container for those things can be helpful. You know, that it's like, oh, like I think of like MMA fighters. You look at like Paddy Pimblett or something. It's like this dude seems like the goofiest, nicest guy ever. And then like you walk in the octagon and you're an assassin. And it's like, and both of those things are really him at the end of the day. You know, I don't think there's like a fake one. It's just that not all of those things can play out all the time because there is context going on. And as you're expanding into that, there can be this feeling of like, oh, is this out of integrity? And I personally, my experience is that it's actually like greater integrity because you're able to bring forward more parts of yourself that maybe don't normally get a seat at the table. And maybe they don't need a seat at every table, but they need a seat at the table somewhere.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I realize, like, you know, in moments like this, even as we're talking, like how bad I am at that. Even in my relationship with my wife, it's like, you know, here's the version of husband Mitchell that shows up, and there's certain like jokes that I don't tell, or like, you know, things I don't say or things I don't do because, and not because it's like, you know, like that she probably would enjoy if I just were willing to go there. But it's in some ways like the parameters that my own, you know, history has reinforced of like, this is your list of do's and don'ts, and, you know, adhere to it. I don't know. I hope I can get better at just allowing myself to love better and to perform better in terms of like the music, and to just like express better. More dynamically, I think.
I get that. I mean, I think we're all going through that, and I think you've done a really good job of it. And like, I don't know. It's a thing that as we expand it, you know, we integrate it, and then other people have to integrate it too. You know, we've talked a little bit about that experience with like waiting to put out Psychosis, and it's like at the end of the day, that feeling of like, well, is this going to feel out of integrity? How are people going to see me? Are they going to think that this is whatever? And like feeling like it is coming from an authentic place, but that it's hard to really explain that to people. And I think that like sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just have to let it ride, and like people are going to figure it out or not. And, you know, there are some people who will give you pushback on it, and there are some people who are going to be like, this changed my life. And so being able to just sort of honor that thing inside of you for whatever role it's going to end up playing in your external world.
It's so good.
So from there, like, so we're doing Down to the River, and some of those early conversations that I remember us having were, you know, we started talking about like, what are we doing here? What is the brand? How do we make continuity? And like, we talked about not wanting to fall into like the tropes of these genres was like a big thing. Like, we don't want to go be in a warehouse. We don't want to go, you know, do a lot of the standard things. And so that was one of the things with Down to the River was like, oh, we can take this kind of music and actually take it outdoors. And like, that's kind of a different environment for it to play out in, to recontextualize it. And, you know, then when we were talking about like, okay, so we don't have tons of resources. Maybe we can lean into this world where initially, you know, you're the character, for lack of a better term, is going through this cognitive dissonance, misalignment experience in things that are very much just like the day-to-day real world, and that as the art progresses and grows, that your characters' integrity and grounding increases, but the environments get more and more unusual, and that the sort of like nature of reality comes into question. And that's like a very simple thing, back to the earlier conversation about parameters, that's like, okay, this gives us a little bit of a box to play in, and there's still a lot of room there. But now, we can continue to carry the emotional core of the music. We can continue to explore this world. And as we've gone through the last few years, it really has turned into creating a world and being like, okay, how do we make a world where this whole thing lives, that the music lives in, that the videos live in, and a world that then the audience can get pulled into as well, that has depth and integrity to it and has layers that people can discover beyond just the music itself. And so that's where like Down to the River was the first experience with that. We started having some conversations about expanding upon that. And then the next big thing I think was Vanity, which was another thing where like you send me a song and I'm just like, dude, the songs just keep getting better. Like I just get so hyped whenever you send me a new song and my brain starts ripping. And playing in that world of parameters where it's like, okay, we can't boil the ocean. What can we do that sort of talks about this? And so, we end up unpacking, like, what are you talking about here? What are you really exploring? Almost back to that, like, the idea behind the idea in Innocent. It's like, what's the core idea of Vanity? And the evolution of that was a funny one because it started with just, like, me going, how do we do something, like, art-wise that puts this a little bit left of center? And so we were talking about like costume stuff, and I was like, okay, we're looking at like prisoner jumpsuits, hazmat suits. Like I was just on Amazon looking for like, what can you get for under $100 that makes this different? And then we started, and for whatever reason, I think hazmat suits was the thing that we leaned into. And then we're having conversations around multiple versions of you, and like, what if there's a version of you that's like in this sort of abandoned mall environment, like we're sort of continuing that idea. And then there's this other version of you that is in the hazmat suit and it's like out buying groceries. It's like in this very day-to-day experience and it's sort of treating the world as apocalyptic, but it's everyone else is like, what the heck is going on with you? Yeah. And that was like the core idea. And then we took a few weeks of just like iterating on that and thinking through what would be the locations, how do we make that play out? And it evolves, right? Like it went from that thing and being like, oh, the terrified apocalyptic version of you meets this other sort of stronger, but in the actual desolate place version of you, and have this sort of mirror moment. And then that evolved and we kind of got rid of the other version of you and really just leaned into the hazmat thing. But the journey became, this guy works for the Department of Lost Souls and he's looking for someone, and there's a poster that's like a wanted poster and he's looking for Mitchel. And then the conceit became like keeping the audience a little bit off balance the whole time, where it's like, is he looking for himself? Is there more than one of him? What's going on here? And just sort of aiming to structure it in a way that created these continual sort of micro reveals and questions that would pull the audience into just what the heck is going on. And so for me, it's like the thought process in developing that again goes, okay, we have this theme of what we're exploring with Vanity, of like, who am I and how does the world work? And am I a narcissist? And, even inside of that going like, is he looking for himself and he doesn't know who he is? Like what is the subtext? And then structuring the narrative. And so I remember I went and pulled a bunch of frame references and started to sort of go through like taking the song and just rough cutting something where it's like, okay, we introduce Hazmat Mitchel, which is an implicit question. What's going on in the world here? And then, we get to the point where we introduce the wanted poster, which has his face on it, which is like, okay, well now there's another implicit question. And so we're just stacking these implicit questions. And then further down the road, we end up seeing regular Mitchel in this restaurant and they have this sort of ships in the night moment, and that sort of leaves us with a door open to continue expanding this world. But we've introduced this new world where there are multiple manifestations or aspects of Mitchel that for some reason are trying to find each other and aren't aware of each other, and that was sort of the container for that. And we ended up coming together and pulling a few friends together and I think banged that out in like 8 hours on a Saturday in a 1.5 mile radius of my house. But I feel like that was the first big step to go from just like, okay, instead of just going around and sort of totally making up down to the river, we're going to build a little bit more world and depth again. And see how that plays. And I think for myself, like my biggest critique on that experience was I feel like I wasn't 100% clear for you on what the like emotional content of Hazmat Mitchell was and like what is sort of the energy there. And I think it still plays. But that was starting to walk into that world. And again, playing it as it lies where like we got into the restaurant and I remember on the day you're like, can I like start a fight? And that's where the pancake slap ends up coming in. And there was a part of me that was like, I don't know if this plays, like it might be tonally off, but it's also like, it's a weird world to begin with. And for me in that moment, it's also like, that is very much an aspect of Mitchell. And I feel like bringing that forth in some way, the authenticity of the not so self-seriousness of it was actually a valuable thing to pull into the world. And so we pulled that together, and I think we did that whole music video for like $400 or something. And it's crazy, you know, how much you can get done with just like some rubber boots and a hazmat suit off Amazon. And then like asking a few people, I went and talked to the people who own the gas station down the street if we could come sneak in for an hour, and they were super cool. And then reached out to this breakfast place, and they were like, yeah, like we can pull some extras in, and like people really do come around making cool stuff together. So that was a really fun experience for me. But what was that experience like for you? I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but I am sort of just curious there.
Well, it was wild to see the like how not serious it was, yet how much you showed up for that, both like in the planning and the orchestration of it all. And so that blew my mind, because really all I had to do was show up. And I think it's like you had just done all of the coordination from, you know, location scouting to logistics of camera and you know, planning of shots, and this thing that it's like very ill-defined as to what it is. You really poured so much time and effort into it, and did it as if it was $1 million shoot, you know, without the budget. And so it's like just the, you know, showing up for something as if it's the last thing you'll show up for, even if it's nothing, and fully with the awareness that it's probably going to flop. When that becomes ingrained as your ethos, I think it's just a matter of time until amazing things happen. And it's just so clear. It was clear to me from, you know, even before showing up to the shoot, that's just the resolve that you had around this. It's like, this is just, I don't care if anybody else is showing up for it like this. I'm showing up for it like this. And what I think the biggest thing to me was what that revealed about your character more so than anything. And so it was a really cool Vanity. I look back and it's like, wow, it looks great. And is it like, you know, super defined as to what it is? Probably not. But what it is it's another touch point of how we're willing to show up. And it's a precursor to some of the other stuff that will come. And I think it's like, you know, we're just gathering data points of like, all right, is the thing in question here, like, can we make awesome looking stuff? Like, no, Evan's got that on lock. Is the thing in question here, are we committed to making awesome things? No, like we are. It's more when we put timing and intentional planning in, like, when we put a story behind this, it's going to blow. And I think we're starting to see that. Like, I think it's like Vanity as its own music video is not an example of something that will blow, but what it is it's revealing of the, you know, the subtextual components that are at play. And in that container, it may not be everything, but it's like, oh, we got something really cool that when we plug it in here, it's just gasoline.
Right.
And so, it sets the stage, I think, if anything, it's like our ability to kind of riff and do this jazz dance of like, we don't have to have all the answers to like commit to doing something really cool. And that is just going to keep getting sharper and sharper and sharper until it's just plugged into the right thing. And so, that was that experience for me. It was super cool, really fun, like really fast paced all day. We were just doing some love smacking Tyler in the face with a pancake. That was the highlight of my life.
Yeah.
But then, it's like, then you move on and it's like, all right, now we get to build out a world and we actually get to put some structure and intentionality here.
Right.
And we get to use that as a reference of what feels good and what is maybe a little off, and then refine it.
Right.
And then it's just like, we're just making a snowball. That's the snowflake that's going to be, rolling itself into a huge avalanche of, snowballs. That makes no sense, but we're gonna roll with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's to that evolution point, it's like, what are we incorporating now? We're incorporating this new layer of a world and subtext and narrative. And like one of those big conversations was, okay, as the music keeps snowballing on its own, people are eventually going to get connected to this stuff. And like, it's really cool to have this like backlog of a rabbit hole they can go down even. And like, even if it's not there now, to be able to go back and sort of put this puzzle together and being intentional about designing it as a puzzle, that it's like, it's not totally explicit. It's not going to give you all the answers. It's something that you could go back from, down to the river, and down to the river feeds into the story of Vanity, and Vanity feeds into the story of Neck, and all of these things are continuing to sort of roll this snowball. And so we're playing the ball as it lies, but being cognizant of building this bigger sort of world and thing that people can go down. And again, having the sense that, like, as we were talking about other artists and inspiration, it's like, if we're going to try and build deep relationships and have this stuff be really meaningful in people's lives, like world building and having it be something they can be invested in and having it be something that you can like introduce other people to beyond just the music is a really cool experience. And that became another core value through the next 2 years following that, was like, okay, we want to keep building depth and Easter eggs and layering these things so that it's not just a song that does well on TikTok. It's actually a world that people can get invested in and want to be a part of and see parts of themselves reflected in.
Right. And that's been the coolest thing as we've continued to build out, is like, okay, like, how do we want to frame this? Like, what are the 2x4s that we're building this with? And how is this structure starting to form? It's like, it was even cool to see the reoccurring themes of nature versus confinement and the implications of each of those. It's like, when we're in nature, although it's beautiful and although it's like, spacious and there's no like visual threats, there's tension. Like, why is that? And why is it that when you're clearly in a confined, dangerous looking space, that there's like almost this like comfort, like this distorted comfort? Like, what is going on there? And why are those things starting to reoccur? Right. I think those are the things that we find out early on, whether it's Down to the River and Vanity, that feel good to kind of explore and press into for the future stuff. Right.
And those become some of those themes, back to building and finding your voice. It's like we're riffing and trying different things, but we're finding what the core themes are inside of that and evolving them, where it's like, in Vanity, it's like, why is he wearing a gas mask outside? Like, what's the concern here? And in Neck, it's like, why is he such a savage in the box and he's like on the struggle bus outside? It's like, and so we're continuing to evolve those themes, but the themes are the thing that once you know the theme, then you can go anywhere and play out that theme now. Like, the location doesn't really matter, everything else doesn't matter. And so we're able to start riffing wardrobe and art and performances, but we have these like grounding principles of the world. And those are things that we can go and explore in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so fun. Like, it's fun to watch it all kind of come together, and then also, like, you know, plans for the future. Like, when we think about what 2025 is going to entail, it's like,
people don't even know what's coming, man.
I don't even know what's coming.
Yeah, we don't even know what's coming. I feel like the one thing that I do want to touch on with that too is just that, like, something that I have noticed in this process is like the power of having an ongoing relationship and like channels of communication. Because like even in any of this, it's like easy to talk about it postscript and be like, oh, this is what we did. But like there's a lot of phone calls that go into any of this, you know, and just talking about things and you going like, I don't know, is that really it? And you going like, what if we did this? And me going, I don't know, is that really it? And like us just sitting there and like chiseling out the core of the thing. And I feel like if we just came in and we're like, we're going to make a music video and we've never met before, it would be very different. Where as we roll each of these things into each other, there's also this just like collective history and shared understanding that allows us to jump in and just dance so fast. Like when I think about Flash Flood and how little communication we really had to do, because it's like we're just locked in on how this world works now. And we're literally driving around with not much of a plan, and we're just going to do jazz in the world in this place. Like that relationship snowballs our ability to execute at a high level that feels really cohesive without having to spend too much time. But that is because of a lot of upfront investment in getting on the same page about everything from very little things to like very big world level things.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny to watch, you know, your steps become synchronized with each other where you're not having to explicitly communicate every little nuance to understand every little nuance and be on the same page with it. That's the coolest thing with both you and Dan.
I was going to say, Dan, I feel like you and Dan have the same thing where it's you guys are just musically locked in now.
He could play 2 notes on a keyboard and know if it's like, you know, if it's going to be a Mitchel Dae song in some ways or like how it develops out. And it's just like, it's those kinds of things. And or he'll just send me like, hey, thought of you doing this. And anytime he sends those, 100% of the time it ends up being something that we like run with because it's just spot on. Like, it's like not even like at this point, he doesn't have to guess whether or not it is the right thing. It's just, he just knows. And I don't have to wonder if he knows. And the same's true with you. It's like at this point I feel like we're just riffing like everything, and it's not just like, oh, I wonder if this is gonna work. It's like we're riffing on like how it's gonna work because we know it's gonna work. And so, or how we want, you know, what angle we want to execute from. So I think that's the coolest thing, is just getting to move fast with people that you enjoy working with. And that's been like it's like I wake up these days and I'm just blown away that this is life. Like, you know, from 4 years, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever, like dumping diesel fuel protein gas into a tank to like, I get to wake up and wonder what I'm gonna, you know, write today, or like what I want to say. And it's like, that's my, you know, that's on my agenda for today. Like, what the heck? How did this happen? Where did this round that corner? Like, I still don't, I could sit down and really reflect on it, and probably I should, but it still boggles my mind in terms of just even thinking, even being in Nashville in a community of people who move here dreaming to do this, who are exponentially, who could, you know, in 5 lifetimes, I would never be able to reach their talent level. And yet, like, why do I get to do this? Like, they should be. And it's like, I don't know what accumulation of things have to go right for that to be the case, or like what formula of instances combined make that work. But man, like, whatever it is, it worked, and I'm grateful for it, and I'm not going to waste it. Like, it's just, yeah, we're just we're just running full speed now because this is, for whatever reason, at this moment in time, this is what life looks like. And in gratitude, moving forward expectantly that awesome things are going to happen.
Dude, I love that. I feel like, so there's one other world that I would love to explore before we wrap this up. We can probably take like another 15 minutes here. I feel like we could talk about the like creative strategy, branding, world building stuff all day. And if people want to hear more about that, let us know because we can get into it. But I feel like the other big thing that I would just love to dive into a little bit has been, you know, especially in the last probably 2 years, this development of yourself, the exponential snowball, you know, going from Innocent being the first million stream song to, what do you do, 22 million streams this year or something, which is a lot.
It's crazy.
But like as things have grown and now it's like, okay, it's not just me. We're aiming to build a team. We're aiming to build something bigger. We're aiming to take this to the next level. There are label conversations. There are management conversations. There are maintaining the integrity of this thing conversations. And I feel like that's another part of the development that tends to be kind of a black box. Like, how do you go from this like one-man band indie artist to really hitting the next level and having it actually be like sustainable as a team sport? And so I don't have like a super specific angle in on that, honestly, but I'm curious sort of your thoughts about that, both in your journey and our journey together, and like what feels relevant to there in this last season and as we look towards 2025.
Yeah, I think there's some fear in terms of like, for so long it was, you know, quote unquote, just me, and like Dan running with whatever I wanted to run with, and obviously playing such a crucial role in that. But it's like me is kind of like the ship steerer. And, you know, you get to claim your wins, but you have to own your losses too. And now it feels like it's getting more legitimate, which is both really exciting and really scary, because now it's like, it means relinquishing a bit of control and extending a lot of trust, which is a muscle that I just haven't historically had to exercise. And so, first and foremost, trusting that, you know, the people that are involved are going to uphold the integrity of it and care about it and nurture it and represent it well. I think at this point, that's very clear that that's not, you know, something that's a threat. I think it's very clear that that everyone involved does uphold it well and whatnot. But, you know, I am human, and I have moments of not being totally clear about it. And I think in those moments, it's hard to kind of not just spiral and be like, well, what if this, or what if that, or what if that person ends up doing this or that? It's like, trusting that the amount of vetting that's happened up to this point is not insignificant, and then trusting that everyone involved is going to still care for this, because there's no evidence otherwise. And it's not to say like, you know, everyone that wants to be involved gets a seat at the table. That's not the case, unfortunately. But it's like everyone up to this point has been like extremely thoroughly vetted and is fully deserving of the trust to move forward with this in a way that's going to progress it. It's like, so just allow them, get out of, like, for me, it's like, get out of the way. I think that's a tough thing to sometimes reconcile. And then also just wanting to, you know, in my own dysfunction, people please for people that are totally not deserving of any trust, like, but still want some sort of a seat at the table, or feel like, if for whatever reason, feel entitled to like speak into this. And it's like, wait a second, like, I don't even like what you do. Like, why do I feel bad about not giving you airtime on this? And so it's like, like just reiterating to myself what is a healthy and functional way to move forward with this when I don't always even trust my own judgment as much as I trust my own judgment. It's a weird, it's strange. And so that's why I also think it's like then leaning, when you don't trust your own judgment, leaning on the people that you vetted to, like, you know, be a voice of reason and trusting that despite your maybe misalignment with it in that moment. And so it's been cool to watch you speak into things time and time again with grace and gentleness, but also like decisiveness of like, hey, I don't think that's a good contract to sign. Like, or, hey, I don't think this is a good move. Like, and then in hindsight, even if my, you know, innermost self is wrestling in the tension of like disagreeing with you because it's like, I just want it. It's like in hindsight seeing, oh yeah, that was a good call. Evan is a very trustworthy part of this, whose expertise and experience and decisiveness and integrity elevate this to a point that is much better than if he were not involved. And so, yeah, I think just like sitting in that has been an interesting, encouraging, frustrating experience that I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I mean, and I think you've at the end of the day, like even in those conversations, it's like, I always say, it's like, it's your ship and like, you got to tell me where you want to go. And if you tell me that you want to go be Sabrina Carpenter, then like, I'm going to hold you to that. And if you tell me that you want this, that, or the other thing, like, I'm going to hold you to that. But like that sense of like, this is your baby and I'm just here to help chaperone that baby in some ways. But I guess to make that more tangible too, it's like, so in the last, I don't know, year, 2 years, it's like label conversations do come up, catalog buyout conversations do come up. People want a piece of the honey wagon. People want to offer you, you know, everything on a golden platter. And that's a new experience, you know, to go from like scrapping together songs while you're trying to pour protein oil in your house to like people offering you in some ways very real money, and like navigating that space. And I feel like my experience there has been that, like, we just come back to like, where do we feel like we need leverage right now? And if we need leverage, sort of like taking the deal on innocent, like we're not against taking leverage, but if we don't need leverage, like we want to maintain long-term artistic and financial integrity with the thing and not slice the pie up a million ways. And so that's been sort of the core guiding principle there. And as those conversations have come up, as deals have come up, like there have been some very encouraging conversations. Like it's always good to hear a label say like, hey, you guys are doing everything right. And like creatively, this feels really in line. And like, we just need marketing and whatever else. But at the same time going like, okay, do we want to do an 80-20 split on this for the next 10 years? Maybe not. And so like, what really are all the options on the table, and just trying to weigh them from a objective position and not get swept into things. And, you know, so as of today, it's like there have been deals that have come across and everything's been walked away from. And, you know, it's an accomplishment to get handed a very real record contract. Like, I think that's such a big thing to get to. 400,000 monthly listeners, 22 million streams in a year, going on tour, putting out music videos, getting a record label offer. But even in that, going like, that's still not the end game here. And so like it would, in one way, it would feel satisfying to take that, but it kind of feels like an easy out. And where we're at and where we're headed and the overall integrity of the thing is like, unless something more aligned comes in, we just don't need that right now. And so we're going to keep playing the game we're playing, and we're going to talk about continuing to make deep experiences that connect with people. We're going to talk about world building. We're going to be intentional about making excellent things, and everything from music videos and content down to, you know, merch and which kind of t-shirts we're using. Like, we want this to be excellent through and through. And And, and then there is a whole side of it that's like, let's look at the business side. Let's look at revenue opportunities. Let's look at how do we make merch work for us? How do we get e-com up? Because like streaming at this scale is not a cash cow. And so there's a lot of logistics and strategy that go into this era of building it. And I think back to your point, it's like that's where having that sense of integrity and alignment is really big, and like being decisive and nimble and moving, but also not putting too much pressure on it to go too fast, and just being like, we're just going to take it 1 month at a time and make these little 1%, 5% improvements. We're going to keep building a better mousetrap, and like believe that compounding over the next few years, that's going to lead to something. But so I guess part of what I'm curious though, again, because I just know this is what's going to be in some people's minds listening to this, is like to even get to this point of monthly listeners, label offers, whatever, like what do you attribute that success to? Like what have been the key decisions on your end that have made this possible when you look at people who are Berkeley grads who are, sending themselves back home, and you are making it happen? Like there's something different there. And what do you attribute that growth to?
I think consistency. There's something about this like unrelenting willingness to just show up no matter what. And you hear that and it's like, yeah. Okay. Like just show up, work hard, hustle, like, all these buzzwords. But it's like, I think in some ways, even just showing up for the suckiness of it, of saying like, like the same kind of like path that we were talking about with just even showing up to sit with you in the kind of like emotional crisis of it. It's like, if we don't show up, the expectation was not to create the Down to the River music video. The expectation was to sit with a friend in, crisis. And what ended up happening is like, we got breakfast, talked through the crisis stuff, and that was all that was needed. Mm-hmm. And then that actually freed us up to then go make Down to the River, which, was a needle nudger. Like that really helped. So I think consistency of just saying like, we don't have to control the narrative of how this plays out, but we're just going to show up over and over and over and over again. I also think a big thing is emotions management. And not emotion suppression. I think there's something to be said about like feeling the full extent of your emotions and not having, again, to control the narrative there. But musicians tend to be very emotional people. And I think emotions are amazing, but they can also be incredibly tumultuous. And when your emotions dictate the actions you do and do not take, I think that's where things can, in regards to a dream, become dangerous, because it's not if, but when you reach your, crossroad. And in some ways we're reaching crossroads minute by minute, which is exhausting. And so if you can somehow find a way to channel that back into the art rather than, just circling in the ether of your mind, it's going to make for better art, which is going to move the dream forward rather than exhaust you and then eventually, burn you out. Mm-hmm. And so I think emotion management is really, really important, because you're going to feel like you're the worst thing in the world. You're going to feel exhausted. You're going to feel like totally unqualified. You're going to feel like you're the best thing in the world. And I think either ends of those spectrums can be very dangerous, and they're important always to just like feed it back into the art, feed it back into the art, feed it back into the art, and then not allowing either ends of those spectrums to influence your decision making. In terms of influence the decision making around how you show up consistently. It's like, in some ways for me, as a very emotional person, the best thing has been just setting a schedule of saying like, this year in 2022, we're releasing one song a month. And it's if I get to the end of the year and release one song a month, I won the year. And it's as simple as that, because within that, it's like, that sounds like a very simple thing, but then in that, are a million lists of potential, crossroads that you're going to have to address. But you don't think of it like that. You just think, I just have to release one song a month. And when you do that, not only are you learning how to manage your emotions that will come up, but you're developing a rhythm and consistency, and you're developing these systems to plug those emotions back into, and almost reinvest those emotions rather than just spend them all. And so I think that's something that I don't often hear spoken about, but I think it is the thing that like oftentimes ends up burning out the Berkeley grad who's like more than qualified to do this, more so than like 99% of the world. It's like they're so talented that there's almost this expectation that if like we're not doing this at a super high level that we failed. And it's like, that's not the case. You just have to reinvest it. And when you don't, it's just a matter of time until burnout creeps in, and then, and then you're just like, I don't want to be on this hamster wheel anymore. And then you stop.
Right.
It's like the amount of people that I started doing music with who were running circles around me, lifetimes of circles, who are now like selling insurance or doing something totally not music related. And again, not saying those are failures at all. It's just they're not doing music. And never in a million years would I thought that I would have been the one doing music as a job over them. Like never in a million years. And it's not a talent thing. It's just like a consistency thing, I think.
Yeah. And I feel like inside of that consistency and continually auditing, like what is moving the needle here? Because it's like you can be consistent in stuff that isn't doing anything. But like going like, okay, we're going to consistently put stuff out. Like I feel like one of the conversations that we've had is, for better or worse, the way the algorithm works at this point, like it's better to put out singles than albums right now. And so like that's strategy wise something we're going to do. We're going to aim to put music out consistently. We're going to do music that's like produced and executed at the sweet spot of like excellence and efficiency. We're not spending 10 grand per song right now. And like, it's just not, it doesn't make sense. And so like, part of that is Dan's excellence and generosity inside of that, and what we've been able to do with photo and video with like the capacity that I have, but going like, how do we find this sweet spot in each of these things, and then just keep an eye on what are the big silos that we need to continually show up in, what are people engaging with. And so like Spotify's crushing, let's keep pouring gas on that fire. Like we want to find more ways to get in touch with those fans and to communicate and connect them to the world. And so let's look at how we do that. Is that social media? Is that PR? Is that email? Like how do we connect with those people? And so just like coming back to continual engagement and continual auditing and going like, okay, how do we make the most of what we've got right now? And what is moving? What are people connecting with? And how do we continue to experiment and iterate and not get stuck in like a reductive feedback loop, but also like not break things that are working, And so like just go, okay, the music thing is rolling. We've got that as a smooth machine. Let's continue to like set clear targets with that. And now how do we do a better job of integrating social rollouts around songs? How do we do a good job of like carrying this brand into the live show and into merch and all of that? And so sticking with, that first few years of like mastering the craft on some level and perfecting the product, and then going, how do we just continue to do these little pieces that are going to put those 5 and 10% lifts on everything? And if we do one of those every month for the next year, and then we do that for every year for the next 10 years, like, it's gone from 0 to 22 million streams, and like, who knows what happens in the next 10 years. But that power of consistency in the honesty of like, this is what I care about and this is what's working. And even if it's not, sometimes it's that weird paradox again, right? Where it's like, what's working and what makes sense inside of the bigger container of like, none of this makes sense and I could have just been a lawyer. Like we're playing, you're playing the foolish game as wisely as you can in some ways.
Yes. Yeah, totally. That's a good way to put it. Absolutely. I also think like one other thing that kind of comes up that I'm like, oh, this was a huge factor for, kind of nudging the needle here. But it's like the relentless surrounding yourself of people who inspire you, or like, you know, I don't know, whether it's mentors or just like peers who are like holding you accountable to reminding you consistently like what got you into this in the first place. Like, it's like I still get the same butterflies in my stomach of the first day when that guitar fell on the floor as hearing a song. It's like it's never, the reason is never that far off. The spark is never that far off, and if it becomes far off, we've got to get back to, you know, to square one here, because and having people around you that remind you of that consistently is so important, because it's not a matter of if, but when things get hard. It was funny. My little brother Patrick came over yesterday and started writing, and he's a beast. Like, he's such a good singer. It was the first time I ever heard him sing, like, isolated. And I was like, Patrick, your voice is insane. Like, we just got to get you some songwriting like chops, and then this is gonna, like, you got something. And so we sat down and wrote, and he's very, very, very picky about how he wants to say things, with virtually no ability to execute on it. And so what you're left with is nothing. Like, you're like, you are so picky, and you're already saying no to yourself over and over and over. It's like you need to say yes to some things that maybe misrepresent it first, and then pivot from there. But when you're just like, no, that doesn't do it. That doesn't. It's like, great. Okay, fine. What does? I don't know. Okay. Like, so is that where we stop? No, I don't want to stop there. All right. Well, where do you want to go? I don't know. All right. Well, how about we do this, that, and nah, that's not it. It's like, okay, you see how this is a problem? Like, and then I think he started to recognize that, and he's like, oh, is this what writer's block feels like? I was like, no, you don't have writer's block because you didn't write anything. Yeah. Like, there's nothing to block in the first place. And so I'm being I'm being very critical here, but it was just this, like, watching him experience that tension for the first time was also, like, really exciting to me. Because I'm like, gosh, like, if you wrestle with this over and over and over, like, I can remember exactly what that felt like, and I want to be a resource for you if that's helpful, but I also don't want to get in the way of anything that you're doing here. And so, I hope that he can, you know, if he desires to kind of move forward with it, I hope he can find people that, you know, really inspire him to kind of keep moving with it. Because I just think that that's such a huge part of keeping you re-engaged with the process. Whether it's people like that you have a relationship with, or people that you admire, you know, from a distance, like things that remind you of why you started, and that you can just reference when it does get tough.
That's it for this week's episode of Second Order Change. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Mitchel for taking the time to come on and talk. I think we were on here for like 3.5 hours, which is why we decided we had to split it into 2 parts. We're going to be back next week with a conversation with James Thomas. James is an incredible writer and storyteller who I met a few years ago, and I was so inspired by this short story work that he was doing, which you're going to hear more about in the episode. But he was producing these incredible little social media content pieces where he was voice acting and sharing the script he had written, and I found it absolutely just like super compelling, and wanted to talk to him about that process and his journey as a writer. We share the background of having grown up very deeply involved in the sort of Christian church environment, and that being a part of our creative journey, learning to expand outside of some of the rules and regulations that had been imposed on us as creatives inside of that, and then figuring out how to continue creating things that we loved and getting those things out in front of people who they would resonate with. So if any of that feels relevant to you, you're going to really love this podcast with James. I'm going to give you a little teaser right now.
If I'm going to be a Christian, I want to be a Christian and this other thing. Like, there's the Christian thing doesn't have to be the defining characteristic of everything I do.
There's this sort of myth right now that's like people don't care about quality. They just want the scroll of it all. And like, I think you're going to have a burnout moment where people go
Right.
like, we want better things again.
You're going to catch a bigger fish that way. Like
You pulled out the old Fishers of Men story on me.
That wasn't my intention. Okay, my dad's a big fisherman.
How to find a pastor's son in a podcast. You can't tell what's going on in a character internally, so you have to have
Right.
this objective external thing that moves as a representation of the internal thing.
Story means everything. You give some form of emotional attachment to what's going on, like that carries the rest of it so far. Like that is the linchpin.
Safe to say it's an awesome conversation, and I think you're really going to like it. And if you're confused, we did record this back in March in Nashville, which is why I look very different. So it's an old conversation, and that was just because I got hung up and didn't release this podcast for about 6 months, but I couldn't let that conversation die on a hard drive. So you're going to be able to hear that and so much more next week on Second Order Change. Thanks.